Thank you so much for joining us for another week of live conversation with event content experts. I'm so excited to kick off with Kat and Shira. You are in for a treat because they have a deep background not only in experience design, event content creation, but also in learning design. And we're going to be talking about how we create compelling content around sensitive and polarizing topics, how we create safe containers, how we train and onboard our speakers to effectively navigate these conversations. And I can't wait to hear their practical takeaways and their real world experience. So, Kat, Shira, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Brian. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
of course. I think, before we even dive into the questions, I would love to give you folks a chance to both, respectively introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about where you come from, who you are, and tell us about the work you do at Up and Up Creative.
Sure, yeah, I can kick us off. My name's Kat. I am a co-founder and producer at Up and Up Creative. I have had the privilege of working with Shira. I've been in this industry my whole career, working to bring meaningful content to stages around the country. We've been working with ideas festivals, corporate clients, you name it. And we really have a passion for working with speakers to bring their message to the stage and also providing a transformative experience for audiences. Shira, feel free to jump in too.
Thanks, Kat. Hi, everyone. I'm Shira. I think learned the very beginnings of content development and creation and holding the kind of intellectual thread of what it looks like for folks to come together at a gathering and be learning together from Audrey Buchanan, who was also on sessions before, and
Yes.
have been able to work with her and with Kat and with others over the years and learn so much about what it means for people to learn. And my background is, as Kat said, co-founder and a producer of Up and Up Creative and working in different learning environments. Then I've also studied some of the neuroscience of group learning in a master's degree to really dive into what's happening in a room when people are learning together. And it's something really special and unique. And if we can understand more of what's happening, then we can design for it more effectively. So that's me.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. I think to kick us off, I want to start us in the place of, as we look to curate content and bring in speakers with diverse perspectives and opinions and points of view, we want to be designing a space that is creating trust and open-mindedness. And so I think it'd be great to hear from you two, why is this topic more relevant now than ever for event organizers?
Yeah, I mean, really, where the main place that we've started to gather to talk about increasingly complex ideas is the internet, right? And I think we're finally waking up to the fact that these tools that we're using are designed to elicit the most extreme emotions. They're designed to show us only the extremes of the ideological spectrum. And so we feel lucky to still be in the business of getting people together to connect and to learn in person, because really these types of gatherings have been and continue to be our most powerful bridge builders. And, hosting in the round conversations around cancel culture or the ethics of AI, how we use these tools responsibly, or, policy items, affirmative action, or different ways that we all want to sort of combat these issues that we're all experiencing, as a generation, as a society. We really feel and have seen that in-person events are some of our most powerful tools to do so. They really are, I think now more than ever, still our most powerful tools. So that's why event organizers should really think about those things.
That's great. And how do you over time, of course, what's happening and I think it's also important to note that bringing forth different perspectives, it's not just political, right? It spans the spectrum of ideas and perspectives. And I think what's relevant in the moment at any given time shifts over time. So I'd be curious, how do you see the shifting expectations of audiences? Like, how have they evolved over time?
Yeah, and I know Shira has some thoughts here as well, but one interesting idea I thought of, because they definitely are shifting, you're absolutely right. We recently a session with Vince Cadleback from Meow Wolf, another great experience designer, and he talked about the transformation economy. So, we went from the experience economy where people certainly there had been such an uptick in people wanting to spend their resources on experiences, right? Instead of material things. And so we rode that wave. And I would say, that's been certainly like we're lucky enough to have ridden that wave in our career. But now he talked about this shift and put some language to it, which was really helpful, which is now it's called the transformation economy. So, people are looking for,
Mm.
it's not just like a group of people with an open bar that's going to do it. People are looking for, there's so many different events to go to now. People are looking for a transformational experience. They're looking for something authentic. They're looking for something meaningful. There's, so many places where you can spend your time. So there really is an increase in that sort of expectation from an audience in terms of what they're going to get out of an event.
Shira, I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I love what Kat's framing here. We've talked about that a bit. What is the growth trajectory that happens through an experience, not just like the connective experience, which is also really valuable. And the other thing I would add is that I think folks are really looking for something that both meets the moment that we're in, that kind of touches on the zeitgeist, that is hyper relevant, but also not lost in the trendiness of a topic.
Mm.
And I think that's where event producers get a little bit caught up, because we don't want to be totally just like riding the wave of everyone's freaking out about this, so we're going to freak out about this too. We want to look at how do we meet what's happening in the world right now with a kind of perspective, groundedness, and a creativity, a possibility for how we can move forward, knowing that this is what's happening. So it's combining relevance with a certain level of stability and perspective. And I think audiences expect more of that these days, whereas before you could just kind of be like, what's the most interesting topic right now? This one. But there's something more that's being asked of us.
Mm. What suggestions do you have for event organizers and producers and content creators to kind of tactfully, delicately thread that needle of those kind of two areas that they're dancing between that you just mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's kind of two ways to answer that. One is a structured way of, oh, I can tell you our kind of like 6 points of how we think about developing a content session that could be helpful. But the second way, which I'll actually say first, is it's really an art. And that's, I think, why we
Mhm.
learning design as an art form. It's really a sense of being able to step back enough to not let urgency drive decision making, but gain enough perspective or research on a topic to say, oh, this is the universally interesting thing that's happening underneath the news headlines that are happening right now. And how do we speak to that idea? And what that I think looks like for, that we've thought about structurally is a series of 6 things you can have in a session that really help you balance that. The first is the framing of the session. So often we think of the framing, the opening, the introduction as just introducing the speaker or the hosting organization and thanking them, but it's actually the moment to set the tone for trust and for that threading the needle. This is why this matters. This is why this is relevant. And this is the kind of ground we're standing on as we have this conversation. So it creates stability and trust in the room. And there's different ways of doing that. But that one of the ways is really establishing a sense of shared humanity or shared identity in the room. So folks are really open to hearing from everyone there, and they're really
Mm.
where they are. And then the second would be zooming in through a personal story. Can you offer something creative and personal? Can someone in the room, a speaker, a storyteller, even the host, share something that gets people into that personal universal territory? And by personal universal, I mean Esther Perel, who's a famous psychotherapist, often will speak about something kind of personal to a couple, but it's actually a universal idea. Like how we all really want both adventure and the exotic, and we want stability and safety, and for both of them in one person. And so she'll be talking about a specific thing, but she's actually tapping on something really universal. Or Artie Gonzalez, one of our speakers, talks about forgiveness often. And he's talking about his own life, but he's also really talking about something we can all tap into. Zooming into personal, zooming out into context and what's most
Mm.
relevant. So I'm saying a lot right now. Just pause it. 6-point structure, framing, zooming in, zooming out. And zooming out is, why is this relevant right now? Why is AI changing all of our lives right now? What is this historic moment we're living through? What makes us want to be in this room right now? What is the context? Having then some space to explore ideas which is like space for debate. There's some artful ways to do that we can get into, or space for discussion. And then having really good facilitation and sense making happening in real time, which again, we could dive into more, but there are certain techniques that a facilitator can do that help people, again, go back to threading that needle between what is relevant and what is stable. The facilitator does a lot of the ideas in the room, helping them build on each other, being clear about drawing boundaries if someone goes a little bit outside while still affirming that person. So there's no shame in it. There's a real art to facilitation that comes in, that sense making for the group. And then the last point is a call to continue, like a call to action. What's the call to continue a conversation? Because usually if you're doing what we're talking about, if hitting something that's in the zeitgeist, it's hyper relevant, and it's also really grounded in something kind of timeless and some wisdom, you're not going to tie it up with a bow at the end. You're not going to be done. So the idea is like, instead of just, okay, we're done, call to action, let's go do something, which is sometimes relevant. What's the call to continue learning? How do you talk about this as a living conversation that's going to go on so you can continue having it with all the attendees outside of the session? And how do you inspire people to feel like there's some closure, but also really good about the next step and some curiosity as well? So those would be, I think, structurally how you kind of sew that line or go through the balance of those two things. But I know there was a lot of information.
No, that's great. And it's my understanding that this is backed in the neuroscience research that you've done around like how do you actually practically frame a session that creates a container in which an audience is more open, more compassionate. I just want to reiterate for everyone. So Shira walked through framing, zooming in, zooming out, creating space to explore, having a great facilitator that can make sense and synthesize the flow of the conversation that's happening. I've got you, Florence, reiterating now. We'll also send all of this afterwards too. So if anyone's taking notes, we'll happily share all the session notes with you. And then a call to continue. So those were the 6. I actually think there's a lot of areas in which we can maybe like trip down the rabbit hole into Wonderland a little bit here, because I have a bunch of questions that bridge off of some of these practical strategies. I think the first is I'd actually love to start with the facilitator, and Shira, Kat, either of you like feel free to run with this. Do you have any suggestions or approaches to help people tuning in and watching? Like, how do you select the right facilitator? What's the process in making sure that you have the right person moderating, especially given the nuance and the expertise that's needed to kind of manage these kinds of conversations in a live environment?
Do you want to go for it? And I'll chime in.
Yeah, no, I can certainly offer some. And then Shira herself is an expert facilitator. And I have to say, I've learned so much from watching Shira. But when I work with, so I will say there's moderators and there's facilitators. And I would put a moderator more in like an interviewer role and a facilitator more in holding an entire group of people. And I know it's like nitpicky, but that's how we think about it when we're booking and when we're designing a session. And so for an interviewer, I can think so two of my favorite examples are actually, I don't know if anyone's seen ones with Sean Evans. Sit tight with me here, follow me, because if you watch the interviews closely, he's one of my favorite interviewers because if you look at the level of research and the combination of the entertainment, pulling you in, light, fun, and actually serious, very thoughtful questions, I will raise that as a fun, sort of unexpected example of an incredible interviewer. And another one is Nick Thompson, the CEO of The Atlantic. Those are two of my favorite in terms of, and it's that balance of entertainment, deep research, and knowledge of the subject matter that we really look for, and connection with the other person on stage. So you can always tell when someone's not really listening, just thinking about their next question versus it's almost like acting, listening and reacting. And so I'll say that for myself, I find that I'm more often in the place of, booking for the stage in that regard. And then in terms of facilitation and really holding a room, I'd love for Shira to hop in because Shira is really our resident expert for sure.
Thanks, Kat. I love that. Those examples are great. And I like the distinction Kat's making also between a moderator and a facilitator, because there are some shared characteristics you look for, but they certainly are also different skill sets in a way. I think to add the facilitation skill set is really about, can you hold the room? Can people
Mm,
trust that you are really like energetically, visibly, and verbally holding what's happening? And that you have enough space within you and enough calm and kind of groundedness that anything can come up and you're going to meet it and kind of like magically weave it in to what's happening and further the conversation. That's really what a facilitator is doing, trying to get people into a state of shared learning, of collective wisdom, of collective insight. And
mm,
what that entails, like, how do you spot a good facilitator, or how do you choose one? Usually it's someone who can hold multiple perspectives at once. They can argue something from one side or another, right? Because that means they can hear comments from the room from one side or another and find the way to build those into one path forward. They know how to like artfully say, hear two ideas and connect them so they can build on each other, but they'll also hear two ideas that are different and positively demonstrate those differences. You know, a person over here says something, another person says something in direct contradiction. A good facilitator can say, this is great. Now we're hearing this perspective and this perspective. So they really know how to make things feel additive, no matter what direction they're coming from. And they also have I think part of the trust and part of the skill set is they know how to draw a good boundary. So that means if someone says
mm,
something that really is out of bounds, is discriminatory, or just kind of irrelevant, or just like a weird personal story, the facilitator can step in and affirm the essence, because usually there's some good essence in what every person is saying, unless they're like really kind of in an extreme end of something in a way that like that, something's going on for them. Usually folks are contributing from some place that they have something to really contribute. So a good facilitator can see that underneath, kind of affirm, oh, I think what you're trying to say is that this is really important. Great, we'll add that to
mm,
the conversation. And we're not going to talk about X right now. And we're not going to use that terminology in this room right now. Or we're not going to, a good facilitator also draws some boundaries that signal safety and just I mean, safety is kind of a weird word that Kat and I debate a little bit, about like what kind of safety, how much safety can you even create? What does safety and resilience look like? But ultimately, I think those boundaries are how a facilitator can signal to the group, someone's paying attention, someone is holding this, someone is ensuring we're going to stay on track. Some things are not going to be part of this conversation. That's okay, but not shaming anyone in the process. Just very clearly designating in terms of the conversation, what's in and what's out of bounds, and not
mm.
doing anything that would harm any of the people involved.
Yeah, I love the note on boundaries, and I also love the note of choosing a facilitator that, I guess the way that I would frame it is that can always assume good intent and see the centeredness and groundedness and intention behind an entire spectrum of perspective. I think that's really powerful. There's two other areas in this that I wanted to dive into, and you kind of teased that you had like more practical tactics on the, I think it's the fourth point, which is space to explore. I'm curious, like, how do you create opportunities and moments for the audience to explore either like within themselves or amongst each other?
Sure. I could start and pass it to you, Kat, or do you want to jump in? I mean, the first thing I'd say, one of the tactics that I'll pass it over to Kat to add is by putting, we sometimes think about a kind of helpful plant in the room, which is not something fake or false. It's just knowing who do we know can model a good perspective that should demonstrates a level of nuance and openness that inspires.
Mm,
So if you're opening up into a group discussion, one technique is to make sure there's someone who's going to start that discussion in the group who's going to open the stage for others, but really importantly model, because what the first person who speaks up does is what other folks take a cue from about what they're going to do next. If you can get one or two people to first demonstrate differing ideas or something and know that there's space for it, that's one technique, but there are many. So I'll pass it to Kat to see if she wants to add.
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind really on this topic is, so yes, we sometimes play with clients, we play with clients too that are coming at it from different perspectives. But something we talk about all the time too is, especially here, we're talking about somewhat difficult topics sometimes, and coming at it from a more universal angle. So Shira and I were talking recently about, if you want to come at a more serious topic like criminal justice reform, starting the conversation from a place, and we'll talk about, and we might have already covered, priming and making sure the context is right to be putting people in that situation. I think something you had wrote to us, Brian, is like what should event organizers think about. And I don't want to say it's a mistake made, but something that should not be undervalued is the context into which you're bringing a conversation. Think about if you want to ask your partner something hard, or, a family member, you want to do it when they're in a good mood. You want to do it, when the house is clean. And the same is for an event, thinking about the context into which you're bringing a kind of tough conversation. Have people been primed to feel open? Have people been primed to feel invited, at will, certainly, like to partake in the conversation, and they're willing and they're meeting you there. So context is really important. And then, yeah, like I was mentioning before, sometimes coming at it from a more universal angle, a hard topic, criminal justice reform, coming at it from a place of, how do we think about forgiveness in our society? How do we think about, some, someone's humanity after harm has been caused? That's something that we talk about a lot, coming at it from a more universal topic or angle that anyone has had experience with. So that often can sometimes be like a Trojan horse way of inviting folks to share and participate and almost back into the conversation that you really do want to have, and the conversation that's going to create progress and get the event to the place that you want it to go.
Hmm. Yeah, and I love what you're talking about in terms of multiple entry points, and I think it's something that you all talk about frequently, and you actually have a framing for, how do you begin to engage with tough topics. I know you just mentioned the Trojan horse entry, but could you actually go deeper into the other entry points in which you design and create and prepare an environment for these kinds of discussions?
Yeah, definitely. I can speak to an example that that Kat and I worked on with our partner Carrie as well a few years ago around the time of the Me Too movement. That was a big conversation, kind of a big cultural moment. And we were hosting and designing a very big event that was happening right around that time, shortly after. And we looked at, okay, what are the different entry points? Like you said, what are the multiple ways people can engage in this conversation? And one is direct entry. So we had Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, on the main stage. For folks who were in that conversation, who are already passionate, they had a place to go to hear the kind of leader they want to hear from at that moment. That's direct. The second way is having some kind of recognizable name, some kind of draw-in entry point. That year we had Esther Perel, who we mentioned, and we worked with at a few different events, speak to, she does her typical live, big interactive session, but in the session, she was talking on topics of consent and boundaries and cultural norms and different types of relational dynamics. So she's both talking about her broader content about relationships and intimacy, but also really speaking to the moment, speaking to what was happening, speaking to this big culturally relevant conversation. So for some folks who just really want to hear from Esther, they're hearing it through her lens, and then they're connecting to the. And then the third way is that Trojan horse way that Kat mentioned,
Mm,
where we're actually, in this case, we collaborated with the late neuroscientist Emile Bruneau, who was just amazing, and Tim Phillips as well from Beyond Conflict, to create this session that was called The Science of Change, How Your Brain Can Change Your Mind. It was looking at social norms and cognitive biases and different aspects of how we perceive the world from this neuroscience perspective and foundation. And one of the case studies in that session was about sexual assault and harassment on campus, and what we know about the
mm,
prevalence of that, of instances based on languaging and messaging initiatives that are relying on the use of social norms. or different other aspects of cognitive bias. And so what that did is it allowed folks who actually want to go to a session on neuroscience to still go to a great session on neuroscience and be connecting to this really culturally relevant topic and moment. And, in that way, direct, this recognizable name or relational and Trojan horse allowed many different ways for participants to connect to what was happening in the world, depending on how closely they identified with the topic or where they wanted to situate themselves. And some people could attend all three, and others could kind of pick a lane that really called to them.
Mm. I'm curious. I don't know what you'll say to this, but as I think about our content planning and event planning cycles versus what's happening outside of our event containers in the lead up to an event, like a big culturally relevant moment that might have threads into the event that we're designing might happen a month, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before our event goes live, and we've had a program locked for 5 months. Do you have you seen I'm just kind of curious, have you seen, and if you have, what do you recommend teams do when there is something that's more relevant, timely, unexpected, and how has that impacted or shifted event content or a program? I'm just kind of curious on what you've seen in that arena.
Oh my gosh, we have so much experience. Well, first, what we do now, 10 years into our career that we didn't do at first, is I recommend always just leaving space in the program. We're almost like journalists, right? So always leaving that space for the timely, for what's happening right
Mm.
now to sort of add a little bit, and if anything, maybe your event won't be over programmed, which we're always doing, sue us. But yeah, so leaving that space, highly encourage that. But one really interesting example, one fun example is I think 1 or 2 years into our career, we were hosting an event that occurred, I don't remember the exact date, but November 2016, the day after the presidential election. And that program nearly completely changed just because of extreme shifts in our society overnight. So that program changed, we worked with speakers. There was a lot of listening. There was a lot of, shifting in the moment. And we learned a lot in that moment too. So I think my biggest pieces are, I really do treat it like a journalism job, and being able to
Mm.
fast move in that moment. And that's kind of the fun part, right? Work with speakers if they're willing. And that was another piece. I know, Brian, I think you had asked before, is you also have to balance that with meeting the speaker where they are and meeting them, where their authentic passion lies. And sometimes that's not always what you planned with them. And so leaving space for that to happen and following them a bit, but angling it in a way that will give your audience a good experience too is really crucial, because we had moments actually in that event, I could say, for example, where we had famous artists and famous filmmaker, we were so excited to have the main stage experience. And obviously this huge political event happened. And, our audience was maybe craving a little bit of that from, these major artists who had made political statements, in our society, and they were looked at as role models in that way. Our audience was craving that, but the artist
Mm.
really want to go there. And so what we learned from that is we sort of tried to push, and it didn't resonate as well. It didn't give the audience as much of an experience as it would have been to really follow the authenticity that was coming from the artist in that moment. So there's also cases like that where you really have to roll with talent. But what I would say in terms of making things timely is you really have to kind of act like a journalist, and events are living, breathing organisms. We always, when we build our run of shows, we always, when you say locked 5 months before, I'm curious what events you're working for, because ours are very, very much living, breathing organisms and require a little bit of that dexterity. And that's also the fun part.
Mm. That's great. You actually, it's I love that you went in the direction of speakers, because that's actually naturally and organically where I wanted to go next. Do to go deeper and further, I'm curious, you just talked about working with speakers who might be hesitant or unsure, especially in this example of something happened the day before and it's in real time impacting the audience, the program, the speakers, the content. It's actually interesting. This is a side note, but when we interviewed Kara Stahl and Audrey Buchanan, they also referenced an event that was happening the day after the 2016 election. I'm wondering if it's the same event, but we went into depth on everything that happened on the production side, like huge disruptive venue changes, security issues, a whole range of things. So I kind of love that we're getting now like the insider look of not what's happening on the production side, but what's happening on the content side. That's just like fun connective fabric between the conversations that we had last fall and today. But I'm curious, like in your speaker training and in your onboarding, like how are you working with speakers to craft the right narratives, drive as much impact and authenticity? I'm curious on your approaches there.
Yeah, I can go first, and then I, of course, want to hear, Shira's experience as well. But what I would say to that is, in terms of a speaker being unsure, that it is a rare experience. But what I will say is, when you are working with a speaker, generally we're going after them because of their work. We read something, their book, their podcast, their art in some way had a message that we really wanted to highlight and elevate. But oftentimes when you go to them and you meet them and start having the real conversation, the angle that you planned isn't always the angle that's going to come out, isn't always what they're most excited to speak about in the moment. And so it is kind of a balance. And I very much learned this over time to meet the speaker, sort of what I was saying with the
Hmm.
artist main stage moment before, to find where that speaker's passion lies now and find sort of the Venn diagram between that and their sphere of genius. We're coming to them to learn this particular wisdom from them and get the best of their work for our audience. But finding that angle, and that's where some of the work comes in, finding the angle where that overlaps with what they're most passionate about right now, because that's really where they're going to connect the most with the audience, and that's what's going to get you the most quality experience. So I'd say it's rare that we are coming to a speaker, and I don't want to say pressuring them or kind of pushing them to talk about something they're uncertain about. Usually we're going for the people that have something to say in the area that we're trying to cover.
Mm.
And I would just add to that, I love what Kat was painting with that kind of Venn diagram. We're looking at what are they really in that sphere of genius that you noted, Brian? What is there? And also, we've had, I think, a tremendous privilege in a way of being able to speak to speakers on behalf of events that are looking for something really creative. So we can say to the speaker, this is a canvas for you. This is a place where you can experiment and test what's at the edge of your work. What do you want feedback? What do you want? What do you want a crowd to engage with you on so you can evolve your own ideas at the edge of what you're thinking about right now? And that isn't right for every event. But when it is the right thing for an event, it's a really exciting place to have the speaker centered in because they're both speaking from their expertise, but also the point of evolution of their work, which brings something new and interesting and engaging. And you can tell their energy is just usually even different on stage. The energy of a speaker who's trying something new based in their expertise is very different than the energy of the speaker who's giving you their kind of like 15-minute keynote they've done everywhere before. And if we can get to that point where the speaker is giving us something kind of new, that's exciting. But I think as Kat was pointing to, it's really an art because you don't want to push a speaker out of their zone of expertise and have them speaking to something they don't know about because they think it's like a wide open canvas. They're going to go speak on this other topic. They actually don't, they haven't done, the career's worth of experience in or knowledge building in. And that's where you want to be kind of careful. And the better format for that is to have a speaker an in the round conversation where someone can speak up and they can participate, but not be kind of in a direct address. So there is a lot more, I think, of this. It's still the art of working with the speaker. And maybe I'll say just one more thing. The way that we often get speakers to go into that zone with us on a call or like in prep is because we've done great research. We know what
Mm,
they've worked on. We know their body of work. We know the kind of interesting edge points. And so immediately in the call, we can kind of establish, that we admire and understand and respect their body of work, and we're kind of can be trusted to explore something with them.
that's great. Something that you touched on that's actually been a really relevant conversation that's happening with us at Session Board. We've been talking to, we've been hosting, dinners and events in person over the country, just having more face-to-face in-person connection, like even outside of this virtual forum that we have here today. And something that we've been really like walking into is hearing kind of a range of ways in which event teams are are getting really, really creative and sophisticated around not just what they're doing for their audience, but what they're doing for the speaker experience. And I love this idea of one of the greatest areas of impact that our event can have is actually outside of our audience. It's how do we push our speakers to grow, evolve? What what are the idea exchange that lead to something happening beyond the event that is tangibly connected to your event? And so I just think that there's this great space to talk about how are we doing a better job of creating growth, connection, collaboration, and intentional experience for the speakers themselves, not just the audience that we're bringing in through the door. So I just think it's really, really relevant, I think, to questions that we're hearing across the industry, ways that teams are trying to kind of push into new boundaries and new territories to honestly, like, not only maximize the impact of their speaker network, right? You have all of these influencers, experts bringing their spheres of genius into this one container. And how does our event actually differentiate by doing something extraordinary with these people that are sharing their time and their heart and their passion and their wisdom with us? So, anyways, off my soapbox, but I love that you went there because it feels so relevant to conversations that we're having in real time with other event teams.
I love that. It sounds like you're also pointing to just moving beyond the kind of transactional exchange with the speakers, which is like, you come give this to us and maybe we give something to you. It's more of what are we part of together?
Yeah.
What is this event part of in your story that's evolving your work? That's transformation for you and transformation for the audience, and really just broader transformation actually for the world around us. Like, how do we be part of that together? I love the way that you're pointing us to that as a full industry trend. And it kind of ties back to what Kat was saying earlier about the transformation economy. Like, it makes sense,
Hmm.
we're actually seeking.
Amazing. Amanda just dropped a question in the chat. Thanks so much, Amanda. She said that we have about 200 breakout speakers. How would you build the connection and collaboration with that many people over a variety of content areas?
A
So
few come to mind. I mean, sounds like a really fun. And there are a couple ways. Certainly, there is a sort of year-round engagement, which I'm not sure how much of that you do, but sometimes it can be super helpful to have a few touch points with speakers or provide a few different touch points. And then there's also the idea of, I don't know how your event is structured, but something that we like to do sometimes with the schedule is create almost a matrix. You'll see you have business in one column and spirituality in the other column, and maybe your speaker who specializes in spirituality and your speaker that specializes in business, and you can, give examples for every category. You have them intersect in ways throughout the program. We found that to be really fun and a way that gives the speaker not only a unique experience, but also something that inspires them in a direction they maybe wouldn't otherwise have gone. Because certainly what I can relate to is there are so many events out there now. And there are so many speakers, that I've been working with even for 10 years that say that we used to get a response right away. It used to be just kind of an honor to be invited. It was sort of at the beginning of when TED was taking off and things like that, versus now there's so much. So you really have to differentiate your offering. And like Shira was saying, like really provide value. And there are ways that you can do that. Yeah, I think by getting creative with the program in terms of who they're partnered with and how that might expand what they're talking about. And also year-round engagement or ways that, you can provide reciprocity. We're always looking for more ways to do that, figuring out what a speaker needs right now or is working on, and coming up with ways to connect them with that opportunity.
Hmm, that's great. I know that we are running to the top of our time. Hold on, Debbie just had a comment. We use planning calls as well to create connection. I love when speaker attends one session and they are on stage, they reference something wonderful they heard from a prior speaker. Yeah, I think this also just connects into I love the 365 approach of how are we connecting speakers into other activations that we're doing year round to create, like an evolving exchange with our speakers through various mediums outside of, the 2, 3, 4 days of our event. But I also love what Debbie's saying here around kind of going back to like, how are we encouraging or creating the speaker to have their own experience within the container of our event? And how can that actually influence their time on stage? So love that comment, Debbie. Because we're short on time, I know there's a few areas we were excited to dive into that we didn't get into. I'm not surprised that we didn't get there given like all of the rich insight that you both have. But maybe an interesting way to kind of tap off the conversation is you referenced earlier areas where you see common mistakes or pitfalls that event content teams make. I'd be curious if we could even go into some more depth around what are some of the common mistakes you see and what advice do you have for folks?
Yeah, I mean, that was a tough one. I would say really just avoiding. I know we were talking about somewhat tough topics before, and I kind of think just avoiding them entirely is something that I'll see some organizers do because, you want to keep people in a happy place and you want people to have a good experience, of course, but sometimes adding that richness to an experience is what really brings something from a forgettable experience to a really unforgettable moment. So something that I would say there is just, yeah, avoiding certain topics entirely. And I hope some of the things we shared, Shira's breadth of knowledge on learning design can help give people tools to not be afraid to sort of dive in because we've seen some truly incredible things happen in that space when we weren't afraid to just kind of, within the right environment, lean into that complexity.
Yeah, I love that, Kat. I think that's a good point. Like when event producers are too afraid to do something and just, oh, we're just not going to touch that topic, but it's already in the room, it's going to be there anyway at the event. Like if it's that big, it'll show up and then you're not prepared for it. And so I think the best approach is to actually prepare and say, what can we do? And the other thing I would add on to that is as event producers, I know we like to plan everything. We want to know what's happening every minute. We want to have everything like totally in our control. And then we put out fires and we figure out what to do. And by nature, complex topics like this are very difficult to plan out. This kind of
Hmm.
discussion space is very difficult to know exactly what's going to happen. So the nature of how you prep and plan for that conversation is a little bit different than when you're, having other topics that are maybe less controversial or less difficult. So I would say the other mistake is leaning on planning instead of leaning on adaptive capability. What are the environmental factors and what facilitators and what resources do you need in a room? What environmental factors do you need? That kind of planning so that then you can be as adaptive as possible in the moment. I think that's another piece I would add.
Hmm. Debbie also added here in the comments, when difficult conversations show up in the many forms they can, especially in Q&A, it's always best to address it head on. It actually reminds me even of a personal experience I had in 2012. This isn't necessarily through the form of an event, but I was on a team that produced a video called Coney 2012, and it was a YouTube video that got 100 million views in 5 days. And there was a lot of controversy weaved into this campaign. And as a part of the campaign, we were doing public speaking engagements across the country. And so we were speaking to 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people a day, packed auditoriums, and we'd be standing from stage, and people wanted to get into the controversy. They wanted to get into conspiracy theories, and they wanted to hear from us internally, who were like the sources of truth. And we very much took this approach of we are going to be authentic, we are going to be vulnerable, we're going to be ourselves, we're going to be honest about everything that we see in here. And our whole approach was just like, to your point, Debbie, it is, we are going to take this thing head on. So that was through the forum of speaking engagements. It wasn't necessarily an event, but you're just recalling back my memories of and heartache of just facing really hard conversations in public forums. And the only way that we knew how to do it in that moment was just to stay true to ourselves. And that was like we did the best that we could in meeting that moment, to reference a phrase that was used earlier in this conversation.
Wow.
All right.
Yeah, that was a big moment. That's a really good example.
It was it was wild. If anyone doesn't know what it is, you can just Google it or send me an email and I'll tell you anything you want to know. But with that said, we have just a couple minutes left. I think maybe Kat and Shira, it would be great maybe just to hear from you. Is there anything that's top of mind that either we didn't share that you're kind of eager and aching to share? Or is there kind of one final like parting thought or takeaway that you have for folks tuning in today? And while you think about it, I would love to know, how can we get in touch with you? How can folks learn more about Up and Up Creative?
Yes, as a way of parting, I want to give Shira a chance to talk about, we are working on a new event series that we'd love to invite people to participate in. But in terms of getting in touch with us, our website is upandup.world, UPANDUP, and we love connecting with other event producers, honestly, other people that live in this crazy world and have this job, as well as, potentially partnerships or ways to collaborate. That would be incredible. Oh, thanks, Brian.
Didn't hyperlink for some reason. I apologize. I'm going to see if I can get it. Here we go. Let's see
Yeah.
if this works.
And I'll just share in the meantime too. Yeah, Kat said our website has ways of getting in touch with us. And what she pointed to, we're piloting this new kind of series and project called Meeting This Moment. And we talked about our events that meet the moment. And the reason we're piloting and bringing this to life is because we really believe that events and media more broadly can offer us more when it comes to meeting what's trending, what's going on in the world, the relevant news cycles, and grounding in the kind of skill sets and capacities we need to ingest that information and utilize it and take action, to be more compassionate, to handle more complexity, to be honest, and to be taking action together in the world. So we're trying to build some new events that really teach people, teach ourselves how to do that. And we'll be sharing more about that in the months ahead. So if you want to get in touch with us or follow our website, follow us on, I think we're also kind of like LinkedIn and social media, on Instagram. We'll be posting things that we're doing. And the parting note I would also just say for any event organizer is that I think Kat and our other partner, Carrie, and I really see ourselves as part of a broader network of people who are just really passionate about what can happen when a room full of people are learning and growing and connecting. Like, we
Hmm.
love that. And I think I would just, leave on the note of thanks for being in this with us, because if, Brian, you're in it with us, anyone who's watching or tuning in or ever sees this is in it with us. Like, we're meant to be together and learning from each other as designers and developers. And as Kat mentioned at the very beginning, in a time where we turn to the internet, or we turn to this kind of distanced way of engaging so quickly, it's just so important that there's a lot of us looking at how we connect in person and how we connect to each other in real time and how we grow and learn together. So thanks for being in this community with us. And thanks for having us on.
Thank you. Thanks for helping push us grow and learn together with you, with everything that you're shared, your practical 6-part frameworks, which I'll share with everyone afterwards. And I think this is also just a reminder, not a reminder, but I'm more a thank you to everybody that's tuning in and watching. Is thank you for the work that you're doing, because you are marching forth in the same direction of trying to curate memorable experiences and growth, like Shira said, that benefit your business, your industry, individual people, your community, the world.